This is Talk, the home of common sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 12:39 is the time. Let's talk to Stephen Wolfe now, former MEP, Director at the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. A very good afternoon to you, Stephen.
Julia, lovely to see you again.
Lots to talk about. No, I mean, where do we even start? Let's talk about a bit of Brexit backsliding. This is a plan, we're told, to take Britain back under the rule of EU judges. What does this involve?
What it means is that the Conservative government had decided that we needed to remove ourselves from aspects of European law that applied to businesses in this country, which meant that the European courts would be supreme over decisions where there was conflict over how a business decision had applied, or a decision between departments that are having investments in parts of Europe and vice versa. Some of those aspects of foreign FDI that you've just been talked about. And on that point, sorry, Julia, only because I've been researching this very clearly since the trade, the US has 1/3 of all FDI in
What
this
do you say, FDI?
Foreign direct investment that you've just been talking about.
Yep.
And if we mess around with America, then we're going to be even a worse state than the rest of Europe. And that's why we need to have a trade deal. Yep. And it has nothing to do with investment. Literally, very few of it is invested in modern tech companies that you've been just discussed about.
That's
a lot
very
of it
interesting.
Financial services.
I want to come on to actually what J.D. Vance, the US VP, has had to say in terms of a possible exit. But in terms of us being dragged back under the rule of EU judges, again, not dragged, we will be handed over by the Prime Minister Keir Starmer. We know Keir Starmer spent 4 years desperately trying, well, the best part of 4 years, trying to stop Brexit from happening and undermining that referendum for Brexit. Wanted to have a second referendum just to confirm. I mean, let's have a second vote on last July's election just to confirm that's what voters want. Not sure that would go very well for him, looking at the polls at the current time. But the thing is, we wouldn't even be a member of this court anymore, have no say whatsoever, and yet we'd say they could have a say. But this stuff about dynamic alignment, I remember all the debates about Brexit. This is one of the, but it's a code phrase, isn't it? Dynamic realignment, basically alignment. Sorry, basically means you go along with all the EU's rules, not just the EU rules today, but anything they do in the future. Well, at that point, can you even get a US trade deal?
Well, I think it'd be incredibly difficult, and this is why we've had problems with our trade deal already, in terms of the way that our ambassadors and trade advisors have gone out. Because what you see in the US is they do not want us aligned with the rules and regulations of the European Union, which they see as an anathema to free trade and an anathema to have an equal trade. Yeah. And if we start doing what this repeal, or rather non-enactment of the legislation that the Conservatives were going to put in place, it means that we have to follow the rules of the European Union, even though on trade and perhaps things like technology or the rules related to products that the EU are already doing in Europe, in the Commission, in the Council and in the Parliament, and we're not there. Strategic alignment means we just do as we're told from the EU, and if we disagree, we allow the European Court to make a decision, which we know will back them.
Well, exactly. I mean, this is the thing. It's so blatant. I mean, do they really think we're that stupid, or they really not care? Again, they do think we're stupid because they think we made the wrong decision in 2016 and again in 2019 to get Brexit done. But it is interesting. This is, alongside the plan, the discussions about, for instance, allowing under 30s to be able to travel freely between European Union and Britain. We were told, oh, well, that's a good thing. These are young people. They're not going to be needing NHS care. They're going to be net contributors and the like. But this is just freedom of movement by the back door, isn't it?
Absolutely. What businesses that are basically in London and some of the cities are saying is we haven't got enough baristas, we haven't got enough people working in cleaning companies, we haven't got enough people who are working in the pubs that we can have at cheaper labour, particularly now that you've increased our VAT and national insurance. So we need cheaper labour, and the best way to do it wasn't it great when we had all those EU students piling into London, 5 or 6 of them living in a flat, earning wages that no one who was a family or an individual born in this country could afford to have that flat, because why would they want to share 5 or 6? But they were here for a short period of time. So what are we doing, Julia? I see that as modern day corporate slavery being enacted by those who believe in freedom of movement for young people. They'll give it as the idea that, hey, this is them giving opportunities to see London, travel the world. But in reality, it's a corporate slave and
but I don't like the word slave, but it's cheap labour, certainly. But
Yes.
the key thing is, I mean, of course, the argument is that and our young people can go and do it, but it's the political classes and the upper middle classes who do this and go, oh, well, everyone goes for a gap year working in Italy. No, they sodding well don't. I mean, they really don't. That's not a thing for normal people.
No, and I'm always recall when we get that particular story as a Nigerian ambassador when I was doing a TV interview about immigration, and they challenged those who are supporting mass immigration and bringing in nurses and doctors from African countries, and they said, why is it that we put money into our infrastructure, train our doctors, train our nurses, and you send out your people to drag them into your country with higher wages? That is to us a little bit of corporatism, and why is it in our interests? You are stealing from us.
I would say it's the worst kind of colonialism, but it's okay. Absolutely. Apparently, because of a good cause. I'm going to ask you just finally, because we've had so many stories. I have to say the Telegraph has been leading the way on this, week after week, day after day, exposing yet another insane ruling, I mean immoral ruling from an appeal tribunal when it comes to asylum, where the Albanian who didn't want to be sent back because he was able to win his appeal because his son wouldn't like foreign nuggets. We've got a paedophile who's allowed to stay in the country because it would be too damaging to his children, even though he was a paedophile, if he was sent back. You name it, they didn't. Again and again. The Times today, they've got a story about 2 lesbians who are from Albania. They've been allowed to stay in Britain after they told a judge they face persecution in Albania, even though homosexuality is legal in the country. But basically they say that the population is largely conservative and patriarchal, and therefore they wouldn't face tolerance there. And a specialist judge rejected the Home Office argument, basically saying it's not an issue, they're not going to a country where it would be illegal, and ruled the couple could remain in Britain on human rights grounds as they faced a risk of potential discrimination. Now, I mean, we've had this with people claiming to be gay young men from some Middle Eastern and African countries on the same basis. Basically, anyone can just turn up in this country and say they are gay and say, well, people might not like me being gay, even if it's legal in the country I come from, and get to stay. That's madness.
Yes, and it is not only madness in the way that we're looking at the rules when you look at a country like Albania, which is being considered to be brought into the European Union. Did that judge take into consideration that particular fact?
Yeah.
Albania, which has done deals with European countries to have people deported or removed from their countries and sent back to Albania. If it's so bad, then why is it an issue for them? But this has really massive repercussions. I actually, on the basis of this story, I wrote to the Albanian ambassador this morning to ask if his country is indeed a danger to lesbians and homosexual couples, as this judge has now said, because if we do, the Foreign Office will need to put a report up on its own website saying it's dangerous for people to go to Albania.
Exactly.
And that we will need to have changes to a lot of our own dealings with Albania on the back of this discrimination.
Exactly.
So the ramifications are much deeper.
Absolutely. Stephen Wolf, thank you very much indeed. Actually, Benjamin Brussels, just bring you on that. But also Hungary, of course, an EU country, their parliament has voted by a 2/3 majority to outlaw any public celebrations, demonstrations of, it was reported in the media as LGBTQ plus, whatever. Again, I don't want the pluses, I don't want the Qs. That's all literally, as I always say, not a thing. T's got nothing to do with the LGB at all, completely different things. But banning those demonstrations, I mean, certainly don't want gay pride to be banned. I think people should be allowed, if they want to have trans pride, I have no issue with it. But I mean, what do you make of that ban in that country? They're saying basically our children have a right not to basically be indoctrinated with this stuff.
Well, Hungary has become quite authoritarian on these things, and it's not freedom.
It's a democratic vote.
It's not freedom. It's
democratic vote.
But it's abuse, right? It's abuse of those people in Hungary who are gay or trans or any of those things to not be able to lead their lives in peace. And
what about the abuse of? I mean, I'm not supporting that law. What about the abuse of women in this country, for instance, who can't live our lives in freedom, go to the toilet being sure a man's not going to be in there, and the law says it's okay?
Well, I don't share that conclusion. I don't think that's ever happened to you. But trans people exist in both directions.
No one said they didn't exist.
No, I said they exist in both directions. A person who's become a man.
You wouldn't be threatened. You wouldn't be. They don't
could go
become
into
a
my
man.
loo.
They believe they are living as if they are. You would not be, as a man, you would not be intimidated by a woman entering the loos.
But I tell you what's absurd is that you could have someone who looks like a man but is physically a female in your toilet, and so I don't think that really solves the problem you're referring to.
But the problem is that there shouldn't be any men in women's toilets. But the thing, so you're talking about the rights of trans or gay people, but what about the rights of I don't agree with that law, and the fact that it includes gay people as well as trans. I think trans activists are out of control. I don't think what they're doing is the solution. But I would argue that, you know what, the non-stop rubbing it in everyone's faces, thrusting it down people's throats, ongoing attack on other people's rights to live freely themselves by trans activists, nothing to do with gay rights activists, in my view. Except you've got gay rights. I mean, there is equality. There is legal equality. Full stop. I think that to a certain extent, I'd say brought on themselves in Hungary.
But no, I don't accept that. I mean, Hungary is becoming incredibly abusive to that section of society. But one country, Albania, I'm sure, I know because I know one or two gay Albanians, it's much harder than it is here. But the laws are actually much the same as Britain. And that's because countries that want to join the EU, one of the things they have to fix at the first stage of that is kind of banning homosexuality, those kind of discriminations.
Right.
So it seems very unfair.
We will have to leave that there. Up next, going to talk about the NHS fast-tracking minorities. It's just anti-white racism by any other name, isn't it? That's up next. This is Talk.